moving on to the next slide. So talking about similarities and differences. So they use the same terminology, and in my experience of working with ITIL, both as a trainer and as a consultant, getting on the same page around the lexicons is just so important. An incident might mean something different to somebody in an IT help desk than it does somebody who's managing security. And recognizing what those differences are and deciding on a set of terminology and agreeing to terminology. As far as I'm concerned, you can call it an apple. Call it what you want to call it, but define what that means and get everybody on the same page. They're both big on the IT alignment to the business, as I spoke to earlier, making sure that IT is delivering services that are valuable and understood and speaks to the business in terms that they need to hear. Continual service improvement is just drop dead critical in both environments, and ISO is really keen on what are you doing to make sure that you're relevant. Process interfaces is very important. So in the old ITIL versions, version 1 and version 2, it was very process centric. And what we found over the years of experience of working with that is by creating processes and making them stand alone, we actually created silos. So that's when they moved in ITIL version 3 in 2011, they moved to services rather than processes as being kind of the kingpin. And interfaces between processes, the handoffs and handbacks and those types of things are really critical. And in my experience in the consulting world, you probably spend as much time gaining agreement around the interfaces between processes as you actually do designing and implementing the processes. And it's amazing how people will have processes in each area and not clearly understand how they interface with each other. And so as we move toward the ISO standards in ITIL, we start to see those interfaces become clearer. Some of the differences, well, there's the standard versus the framework. So ITIL, COBIT, CMMI, those are frameworks. And what they're doing is they're establishing a set of best practices. ISO is specifically measuring to a standard. And that's the thing that's unique about it is, okay, now you actually have to prove that you're doing things. With the frameworks, it's like, here's the best way to do it. Here's how you can adapt it to your environment, or you may need to decide how that works for yourself. But when you talk about it in terms of a standard, it's very binary. Are you doing it, yes or no? The frameworks are around accessibility, where a standard is around auditability. And as I spoke to with the service management system or any management system, auditability is really the thing that you want to focus on. Make sure that if somebody walks in and opens up that binder or goes to that SharePoint site and looks at a set of documents and a set of processes or a set of measurements and metrics, that it's current, it's kept up to date, it's relevant to the current business, all of those things. One of the other differences is that there's targeted IT functions in ITIL. ISO is not so concerned about that. And then the service management system, as I spoke to, and of course the people focus of the ISO 20000. As an auditor, there are some key questions that I ask, and it doesn't matter if I'm auditing as 20,000 an IT organization or as a 9,000 auditor and I'm auditing something like a shop that makes brake pads for cars, for example. And I'm not concerned about how you make your brake pads. What I'm concerned about is, do you have it documented? Is there rigor? Is it kept up to date? How do you train to the processes? How do you ensure that there's an education process around maintaining those? How do you make sure that you're measuring the effectiveness of that process? How do you make sure that you're measuring the relativity and the changes in that process? And those are the key questions you ask as an auditor across all the standards. And that's where the management system is so important, but also making sure that the people that are delivering on this have a clear understanding of where to go, to make sure that they're still following proper process, to make sure that it's still current, and to make sure that it's still effective. And that's really the primary difference, is the auditability. Moving on. So how do you combine a standard